6 years ago, on a clear summer morning, David Collins tightened the straps of his weathered backpack and glanced at his teenage son, Ethan, who was bubbling with energy and curiosity. The father and son pair had set out to conquer Glacier Canyon, a rugged stretch of wilderness in Wyoming's Grand Teton region. They checked in at the ranger station, noted their route, and smiled for a quick photo before starting the trail. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. By nightfall, they had vanished without a trace. Search teams combed the area for weeks. Helicopters scanned the jagged ridges, and rescue dogs traced every scent they could find. But the canyon offered no clues. No torn clothing, no abandoned gear, not even a footprint. The Collins family was left in limbo. David's wife, Sarah, haunted by unanswered questions. Ethan's friends, unable to grasp how someone so full of life could disappear so completely. For years, the story remained a painful mystery, another name added to the long list of hikers claimed by the unforgiving American wilderness. Before we go deeper into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any of our future investigations into real-life mysteries and survival stories. Now, 6 years later, hope flickered once more, unexpectedly, through the lens of a drone. Michael Turner had always been drawn to unsolved cases. A freelance journalist with a stubborn streak, he was the kind of man who believed no story was truly over until every stone was turned. His interest wasn't only professional. Years earlier, his younger brother, Mark, had died during a climbing accident in Colorado. The loss left Michael with a hollow space inside him and a relentless desire to understand why people vanish in the wilderness and why some stories remain unfinished. When Michael first read about the Collins case, he saw reflections of his own pain. The details were painfully familiar: a family torn apart, endless speculation, official reports that closed without true resolution. For years he clipped every article, saved every mention of the case. Still, the trail remained as cold as the canyon winds, until a casual phone call from a friend changed everything. The friend, an avid drone hobbyist named Daniel, had been filming landscapes near Glacier Canyon. While reviewing his footage at home, Daniel noticed something odd. In one frame, sunlight caught on what looked like a metallic object half hidden in the canyon. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the light, but when he showed Michael the footage, the journalist's pulse quickened. The glint didn't resemble natural rock. It looked like gear, old, battered, but human-made. Michael leaned forward, replaying the clip again and again. "That's not just debris," he muttered. "That's something." Daniel frowned. "Or nothing. Could be an old canteen. Could be trash. You're chasing shadows, Mike." But Michael couldn't let it go. The canyon had refused to yield answers for 6 years. If this was a clue, however faint, he had to follow it. Had to. He knew better than anyone that families deserved closure, and Sarah Collins still lived in the cruel uncertainty of not knowing whether her husband and son had fought to survive or perished quickly in the cold grip of the canyon. He picked up the phone and called Sarah, hesitant but determined. Her voice carried both weariness and an edge of cautious hope when she listened to his words. "Another lead?" she asked softly. "Do you really think there's something there?" "I can't promise," Michael admitted, "but I believe it's worth looking into. If there's even the smallest chance, you deserve to know." Silence stretched for a moment before she whispered, "I just want the truth, Michael, whatever it is." And so the seed was planted. What began as a casual drone flight was about to evolve into an expedition that would test courage, loyalty, and endurance. For Michael, it wasn't just about the Collins family anymore. It was about facing his own past, about walking into a canyon that had already claimed 2 lives and demanded answers no one had yet been able to give. The canyon was waiting. Glacier Canyon was not just another trail on the map. It was a place wrapped in equal parts beauty and danger. Nestled within the jagged wilderness of Wyoming, the canyon carved deep into the earth with cliffs that rose like sharp teeth and shadows that lingered even under a midday sun. To locals, it was both a wonder and a warning. Families came to admire its sweeping vistas, yet every ranger knew that the canyon could swallow the unprepared without mercy. Michael Turner's research began with stories whispered in town diners and ranger stations. People remembered the Collins case vividly. At a cafe in Jackson, an older man shook his head as Michael asked about the canyon's reputation. "You don't fight Glacier Canyon," the man said, his voice gravelly from years of ranch work. "You respect it, or it'll take you." Michael scribbled the words down. He had learned that folk wisdom, no matter how simple, often revealed deeper truths about a place. He spent hours in the county library, pulling records of past disappearances. The statistics told their own chilling tale. Over the decades, dozens of hikers had vanished there. Most were eventually found, injured, frostbitten, or worse, but a handful remained mysteries, names etched into ranger logs with no final chapter. Laura Mitchell, a seasoned park ranger, sat across from Michael in her small office at the visitor center. Her desk was cluttered with trail maps, wildlife reports, and a framed picture of her daughter smiling on a hike. She had been part of the original search team for David and Ethan. "You have to understand," she told him, her tone steady, yet shadowed by memory. "We covered every inch we could safely reach. Air support, dogs, volunteers were everything. But the canyon doesn't give up secrets easily. Its terrain shifts. Avalanches bury evidence and storms wash away tracks. You can walk within 20 feet of something and never see it." Michael leaned forward. "And yet, people still go back, even after knowing the risks." Laura gave a small, tired smile. "Because it's beautiful. Because standing on those cliffs makes you feel small in the best way. People come for the challenge, the silence, the wildness. They think they're prepared. Some are, others—" She let the sentence hang. In the evenings, Michael wandered the town, listening to conversations and collecting impressions. In the bar near the square, hunters spoke of near misses with sudden storms. A young couple described how their GPS failed halfway through the trail, forcing them to rely on instinct. Each account fed his understanding of why Glacier Canyon inspired awe and fear in equal measure. But the most haunting words came from Sarah Collins herself, when Michael met her again at her home. Her voice trembled as she recalled the warnings she and David had brushed aside. "He always said he knew the land," Sarah whispered, her hands clasped tight in her lap. "He grew up hiking with his father. He thought he could read the canyon like a book. I begged him to take a guide, but he wanted to show Ethan he could handle it. Now I wonder if pride was our undoing." Michael wrote late into the night, his notes filling pages with observations, testimonies, and fragments of local lore. The canyon loomed larger with every detail, not just as a landscape, but as a character in its own right, unforgiving, unpredictable, yet magnetic in its allure. He knew he couldn't stop at research. The more he uncovered about Glacier Canyon's history, the stronger the pull became. Each story was like a thread leading back to the same point. The Collins disappearance was not an isolated event, but part of a long pattern etched into the canyon's legacy. Michael closed his notebook and exhaled slowly. Somewhere in those ridges and shadows lay an answer that no one had found. And if the drone footage meant anything, he might be closer than anyone else had ever been. The canyon had claimed lives before, but it had also left traces, fragments of stories waiting to be told. And now, with the past pressing heavily on his shoulders, Michael prepared to step deeper into a mystery that refused to fade. The morning of the Collins disappearance had been ordinary, almost deceptively so. Rangers remembered David Collins arriving with his son at the trailhead, a man who carried himself with quiet confidence. He wore a faded baseball cap, sunglasses, and a jacket tied around his waist. Ethan trailed beside him, taller than his years suggested, his laughter echoing against the wooden beams of the ranger station. "First time in Glacier Canyon?" a ranger had asked, jotting their names into the logbook. "Not mine," David replied with a half-smile. "Been here before, but it's his first time." "Thought I'd show him what real hiking feels like." He rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder, the boy grinning wide. They discussed their planned route, pointing to a trail map tacked to the wall. It was ambitious, but not reckless. David signed the sheet, promised to return by evening, and thanked the ranger with the casual air of a man certain he would keep his word. From that moment forward, the record of their journey became fragments stitched together by memory and speculation. A hiker later reported seeing them at a trail junction, David steady and focused, Ethan pausing often to take pictures with his phone. They looked fine, the hiker recalled to investigators, like any father and son out for an adventure. Nothing unusual. Sarah Collins remembered the last conversation she had with them before they left. She had called David's phone, her voice cheerful but tinged with the worry she always carried when he went into the backcountry. "Promise me you'll check in tonight," she had said. "Of course," David replied, his tone gentle but firm. "We'll be back before you know it." "Ethan's already talking about bragging to his friends." Ethan's voice had chimed in, youthful and bright. "Mum, don't worry, Dad's got me. I'll take lots of pictures, you'll see." Those words haunted her. They had been filled with such certainty, such innocence. When the sun dipped behind the canyon walls that evening and no call came, Sarah's unease hardened into dread. By the following morning, when David's phone went straight to voicemail, she contacted the rangers. The official timeline painted a stark picture. Search teams retraced the route they were supposed to follow. Helicopters scanned open clearings, while volunteers spread across ridges and valleys. For days the canyon echoed with shouts of their names, the rhythmic barks of search dogs, and the whir of blades slicing the cold air. But the wilderness remained silent. One ranger later admitted the search felt like chasing smoke. "It was as if they'd walked into the trees and just disappeared," he said. "No prints, no scraps, nothing." It didn't make sense. For Michael Turner, piecing together those final hours was like assembling a puzzle with missing corners. Every testimony he gathered, the ranger at the logbook, the hiker at the junction, Sarah's phone call, sharpened his sense of the tragedy. He could almost see David adjusting his backpack straps, Ethan racing ahead a few feet, eager to lead the way. He could almost hear the crunch of boots against gravel, the rustle of leaves stirred by mountain breezes. But beyond those reconstructed moments, the trail went dark. What had they seen that others had missed? Did a sudden storm catch them off guard? Did David misjudge the terrain despite his confidence? Or was there something hidden in the canyon, waiting quietly, that changed everything in an instant? Michael wrote the questions down in his journal, circling them again and again. His chest tightened as he thought of Sarah living with those unanswered doubts for 6 long years. He remembered his own mother, staring out the window the night his brother didn't return, clutching a phone that never rang. The weight of uncertainty was its own kind of torment. The Collins' last known day was more than a record in a ranger's log. It was the beginning of a wound that never closed. And as Michael stared at the blank space where answers should have been, he knew the only way forward was to search deeper. Michael Turner sat at his desk, the drone footage replaying on his laptop for what felt like the 100th time. The clip began innocently enough, a wide sweep of Glacier Canyon, the camera gliding smoothly over pine ridges, sunlight glinting off jagged rocks. But then, just for a moment, the frame caught something that didn't belong. A flash of light, faint but distinct, came from deep within a shadowed cleft of the canyon. Daniel, the drone hobbyist, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I told you, Mike. It's nothing. Sun bouncing off wet stone, maybe. You're seeing what you want to see." Michael shook his head, rewinding the video. He zoomed in, pixelated edges blurring into blocks of grey and green. Yet the glint remained, metallic, angular, too deliberate to be mere rock. His pulse quickened. "No, Daniel," he said firmly. "This isn't just light. Look here. The way it catches. It's reflective. Gear doesn't vanish without a trace. If this is even a piece of their equipment, it's more than anyone's found in 6 years." Daniel sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I don't want to give Sarah false hope. Haven't those people been through enough?" Michael paused, considering his friend's words. It was true. Every new lead risked reopening wounds for the Collins family. Yet he couldn't ignore what he saw. Hope and truth weren't the same, but sometimes one was the only path to the other. Later that evening, Michael played the clip for Laura Mitchell, the ranger who had been candid about the canyon's treachery. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the flicker of light. "Could be an old stove. Maybe even part of a tent frame," she murmured. Her voice carried the weight of experience. but also the caution of someone who had seen false leads before. Or it could be nothing. The canyon's full of surprises. Michael looked at her, his expression unwavering. You've been in those mountains longer than anyone. If this were your family, would you want someone to check? Laura's gaze hardened, but she didn't answer immediately. After a long silence, she said quietly, "Yes, I'd want to know." The footage became a magnet for Michael's obsession. He spent nights cross-referencing maps of the area with the drone's flight path, calculating distances and possible routes to reach the location. The terrain looked brutal: steep cliffs, unpredictable weather, and patches of forest so dense they swallowed light even at midday. Yet the thought of leaving the clue unexplored gnawed at him. One evening, as rain drummed against his apartment windows, Michael spoke aloud to himself, though the room was empty. If they fought to survive out there, someone has to honor that. Someone has to finish the story. He picked up the phone and dialed Sarah Collins. His voice carried both urgency and care as he explained the discovery. She listened silently, and for a moment Michael wondered if she had hung up, but then her breath trembled through the line. "You really think this could be theirs?" she asked. "I don't know," Michael admitted, "but it's something, and it's more than we've had in years." Her silence stretched again before she whispered, "Please, Michael, don't let it end like this. Find out what it is." That night he closed his journal with a sense of finality. The line between curiosity and responsibility had blurred. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a promise. The drone's discovery, dismissed by others as a flicker of sunlight, had become a beacon in Michael's mind. It pulled him forward with relentless force, away from libraries and interviews, toward the unforgiving heart of Glacier Canyon itself. Whatever waited in that shadowed cleft, truth, closure, or disappointment, he knew he had to see it with his own eyes. Michael Turner knew he couldn't face Glacier Canyon alone. The drone footage had given him a lead, but the canyon's reputation was enough to make even seasoned hikers hesitate. He needed allies, people who understood the terrain, the risks, and the demands of survival in one of the harshest corners of Wyoming. His first call was to Ranger Laura Mitchell. She had already seen the footage and offered cautious insight, but Michael needed her commitment. He found her in the ranger station, bent over a stack of wildlife reports. "Laura," he began, sliding the laptop across her desk, "I need you on this. Not as an advisor, but as part of the team. You know the canyon better than anyone. If there's even a chance of finding something, you're the one who can guide us through it." Laura leaned back in her chair, studying him with narrowed eyes. "You don't understand what you're asking? The place is dangerous even for trained rangers. I've lost colleagues in those mountains, and you're a journalist, Michael, not a climber or a medic." "I'm someone who won't give up," he countered. His voice was steady, but there was a plea beneath it. "You told me yourself, if it were your family, you'd want someone to check. Sarah deserves the truth." "Ethan deserves the truth." Laura sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the overhead light. Finally, she said, "If I agree, we do this by the book. No reckless shortcuts. We go in prepared, and we come out alive. Promise me that." "I promise," Michael said, though a part of him knew promises meant little against the canyon. The second ally came from a different world altogether. Sam Carter was an ex-Army medic who had turned to wilderness training after leaving the service. Known among outdoor circles for his bluntness and daring, Sam had pulled stranded climbers out of ravines and patched up more injuries than he cared to remember. Michael tracked him down at a survival workshop outside Jackson. Sam greeted him with a firm handshake and a skeptical grin. "So you're the journalist chasing ghosts?" Michael didn't flinch. "Not ghosts, evidence. A family needs answers. I need your help." Sam chuckled, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "I don't work for free, and I don't babysit reporters who think they can play explorer." Michael met his gaze. "I'm not asking you to babysit me. I'm asking you to keep us alive long enough to reach the truth. You've done worse in harsher places. Glacier Canyon can't be worse than Afghanistan." Sam's expression hardened, the humor fading from his eyes. For a long moment he said nothing, then finally muttered, Don't be so sure. He looked away, jaw tight, before nodding once. Fine. I'll come. But understand this. I'll push us farther than you think you can go, and if you freeze or panic, I won't carry you out. Understood, Michael said quietly. The unlikely team was forming. Laura with her discipline and intimate knowledge of the land, Sam with his grit and survival instincts, and Michael with his unshakable determination. Yet even as they gathered around maps and gear lists, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Laura believed in caution, in respecting the canyon's dangers. Sam thrived on risk, convinced that bold moves saved lives. Michael stood between them, trying to balance their philosophies, while wrestling with his own inner fears. Late one evening, as they reviewed topographic maps spread across Michael's dining table, Laura tapped a ridge with her pen. This is where the footage points. But the slopes are unstable. One wrong step, and... Sam interrupted, his tone sharp. Then we don't make the wrong step, simple as that. Laura shot him a glare. You can't treat this like a battlefield. Nature doesn't care about bravado. Michael raised his hands, weary but firm. We're not here to argue, we're here to prepare. We can't afford to be divided when the canyon's waiting. The silence that followed was uneasy, but it was also the beginning of something fragile, an alliance forged not by trust but by necessity. The journey ahead would test whether that was enough. The plan to enter Glacier Canyon was set in motion, but the reality of preparation struck Michael Turner harder than he expected. Books and maps could only carry him so far. The canyon demanded more: equipment, endurance, and above all, commitment. Laura Mitchell met him at an outfitter's shop on the edge of town. The place smelled of leather and cold steel, shelves lined with ropes, carabiners, waterproof packs, and survival gear. Laura moved with practiced ease, inspecting items with the precision of someone who had spent years in the field. You'll need more than enthusiasm out there, she said, holding up a coil of climbing rope. Weight matters. Choose wrong and you'll regret every pound. Michael glanced at the price tag, his stomach tightening. Each piece of equipment was another dent in his already strained budget. Sam Carter arrived a few minutes later, tossing a duffel bag onto the counter. Don't waste time counting pennies, Turner. Out there, the wrong gear gets you killed. Michael forced a smile, but the truth gnawed at him. He wasn't wealthy. Freelance journalism barely paid the bills, and this expedition demanded sacrifices. That night, he stared at the shelves of his small apartment. Books, framed photos, an old guitar. Slowly, he began pulling items down, sorting what he could sell. The guitar, once his brother's, lingered in his hands the longest. He strummed a single chord before setting it gently into its case. The pawnshop owner raised an eyebrow when Michael laid it on the counter. This is worth more than cash, son. Sure you want to let it go? Michael hesitated, then nodded. Some things have to be given up so others can be found. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't look back. Days turned into a rhythm of training and planning. Laura drilled them on navigation, teaching Michael how to read subtle signs in the terrain. Shifts in vegetation, the sound of distant water, the way clouds gathered over ridges. She insisted they rehearse emergency protocols until they became instinct. Out there, she reminded him, hesitation can mean disaster. Sam, meanwhile, pushed him physically. They hiked trails in the pouring rain, scaled rocky inclines until Michael's legs trembled, and set up camp under conditions that tested patience and endurance. You think pain is your limit, Sam barked during one grueling climb, but pain is just the gatekeeper. Push past it, or the canyon will eat you alive. Michael gritted his teeth, every muscle burning, but each step carried him closer to readiness. In quiet moments, though, doubt gnawed at him. Would all of this be enough against a place known for swallowing even the prepared? One evening, the three of them gathered in Laura's cabin, maps spread across the table. A lantern cast warm light against their weary faces. This is the window, Laura said, pointing to the calendar. Weather's stable for the next week. After that, storms roll in. If we're going, it has to be now. Sam nodded. Then we go. No more hesitation. Michael looked between them, heart pounding. The sacrifices, The money, the exhaustion, the painful memories stirred by every choice had brought him here. He thought of Sarah Collins, her voice heavy with years of unanswered questions. He thought of Ethan, a boy whose laughter still echoed in the minds of those who had known him. He set his hand on the map covering the marked trail. "We're ready," he said, more to himself than to the others. "Whatever waits in that canyon, we'll face it." The decision was made, preparations complete, sacrifices accepted. Ahead lay the descent into Glacier Canyon, a place that had defeated many before them. Michael felt the weight of what he was about to do settle into his chest, but beneath it pulsed something stronger: resolve. The canyon was no longer just a story he was chasing. It was a promise he intended to keep. The morning of the descent into Glacier Canyon arrived with a sky painted in pale hues of blue and gray. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and cold stone. Michael adjusted the straps of his new pack, every ounce of gear pressing against his shoulders like a reminder of the weight he carried. Not just supplies, but responsibility. Laura stood nearby, double-checking ropes and harnesses with steady, practiced hands. Her calm presence masked the tension in her eyes. "We keep a strict pace," she said firmly. "No rushing, no shortcuts. We stay together, or we don't go at all." Sam gave a wry grin, tugging at his gloves. "Rules, rules, rules. You know the canyon doesn't play by them, right?" Laura shot him a sharp look. "That's why we do." Michael remained silent, caught between their opposing philosophies. He could already feel the canyon looming over them, its cliffs cutting into the sky like jagged blades. Every gust of wind whispered a warning. This place belonged to no one but itself. The trail began deceptively gentle, winding through forested slopes where sunlight broke through in fractured beams. Birds scattered at their approach, and the crunch of boots against earth became the steady rhythm of their march. But soon the ground tilted steeply, forcing them to brace against loose gravel and shifting stones. Michael's breath grew labored. Sweat gathered under his jacket despite the chill in the air. He glanced at Laura, who moved with controlled precision, and then at Sam, whose long stride seemed fueled by defiance more than care. Halfway down a steep incline, Michael's boots slipped on loose shale. His heart lurched as gravity pulled him sideways, but Laura's hand shot out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Careful," she barked, steadying him. "One mistake is all it takes." Michael's chest tightened. "Thanks," he muttered, shaken by how quickly control had nearly slipped away. Sam smirked, though his tone held no malice. "Better get used to it, Turner. The canyon likes to test who belongs here." By midday, clouds rolled in, casting shadows that deepened the canyon's natural gloom. They stopped for a short break near a ledge overlooking a valley, where icy winds sliced through their layers of clothing. Michael chewed on a granola bar, his hands trembling slightly, though he wasn't sure if it was from hunger, fatigue, or nerves. "This place feels alive," he said quietly. Laura followed his gaze. "It's not alive. It's indifferent. That's what makes it dangerous." Sam laughed softly. "I'd take indifference over malice any day. At least you know where you stand." As evening approached, they reached the canyon floor, a place where shadows stretched long and silence pressed heavy against their ears. The walls towered above them, jagged and imposing, cutting off most of the fading light. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen branches and boulders that looked as though they had tumbled down centuries ago. Exhaustion weighed on them as they set camp. Laura worked methodically, pitching a small tent and checking for hazards. Sam gathered wood, striking flint until sparks caught, the fire a fragile defiance against the encroaching darkness. Michael sat by the flames, staring into the glowing embers. His mind drifted to the Collins last night here, imagining David and Ethan sitting in a place not unlike this. Did they laugh? Did they argue? Or did fear already begin to creep into their hearts? The canyon around them was eerily quiet, broken only by the crackle of fire and the occasional snap of unseen movement in the trees. Michael pulled his jacket tighter, a shiver running through him. The weight of what they had chosen to do pressed down harder than the pack on his shoulders. As night deepened, he realized the descent was only the beginning. Whatever truths waited within Glacier Canyon lay still ahead, buried in shadows that seemed unwilling to yield. The next morning, a pale mist clung to the canyon floor, curling around boulders and tree trunks like a veil. Michael woke to the chill of damp air, his breath visible in short, uneven puffs. The fire from the night before had long gone cold, leaving only faint embers buried in ash. Sam was already up, crouched near the stream that wound through the rocks, filling canteens with steady hands. "Day 2, Sam muttered, handing one to Michael. "This is when people start realizing how unkind the canyon really is." Laura adjusted her pack straps, eyes sweeping the terrain with deliberate care. "Stay alert. We're not just fighting nature. We're fighting time. Clues don't wait for us." They pressed forward, boots crunching over gravel and roots. The trail dissolved quickly into dense thickets and fractured rock formations. Every step demanded attention. Branches scraped at their jackets, and the silence of the canyon pressed down with the weight of something ancient. Hours into their trek, Michael's gaze snagged on a patch of earth near a cluster of fallen logs. Something metallic caught the light. His heart jumped. "Wait!" he called, crouching down. He brushed aside dirt and pine needles, revealing the corroded edge of a camping pot, rusted, dented, almost swallowed by the ground. Laura knelt beside him, her face tightening as she examined it. This could be from them, or anyone, really. 6 years is a long time. Michael turned the pot in his hands, noticing faint scratches along the rim. His chest tightened with hope. What if it's theirs? Sam looked over, unimpressed. And what if it's just some camper's junk? You can't cling to every scrap of metal you see, Turner. Michael bristled, gripping the pot tighter. It's something. And something is more than nothing. The tension between them thickened, silence hanging heavy until Laura intervened. Arguing won't get us anywhere. We log it, we mark the spot, and we move on. Evidence doesn't prove itself in the field. Reluctantly, Michael slid the pot into his pack. The weight was negligible, yet it felt monumental, like he carried a fragment of the Collins' presence. As they pressed deeper, the canyon grew harsher. Slopes forced them to scramble on all fours, their hands scraped raw against stone. A sudden slip sent a cascade of rocks tumbling into the ravine below, the echo thunderous in the silence. Michael's pulse pounded in his ears, his mind conjuring images of David and Ethan navigating the same peril. Had they stumbled here? Had a single misstep set the tragedy in motion? Near midday, Laura halted abruptly. Her sharp eyes had caught something wedged between two rocks, a fragment of fabric, weather-beaten and frayed. She tugged it free, holding it up. The once bright nylon had faded to dull brown, but the torn seam suggested it had been part of a backpack or jacket. Michael's throat tightened. That could be theirs. Sam exhaled through his nose, skeptical. Could be anyone's. Could have been blown here, dropped a decade ago. You're seeing ghosts again. Laura folded the fabric carefully, her tone calm but firm. Sam, dismissing everything won't help us either. Each clue matters until proven otherwise. The debate simmered between them, each perspective clashing in the narrow space of the canyon. Michael clung to every sign as hope. Laura treated each with professional caution, and Sam regarded them with hardened realism. The friction was exhausting yet necessary, 3 mindsets keeping one another in balance. By late afternoon, their progress slowed under fatigue. The canyon walls pressed closer, shadows stretching long as the sun dipped behind the ridges. Michael felt the weight of the day's discoveries gnawing at him. Rusted metal, torn fabric. Were these breadcrumbs leading to truth, or just remnants of unrelated wanderers swallowed by the same merciless wilderness? He lay in his tent that night, listening to the distant groan of shifting rocks echo through the canyon. His mind replayed the moment his fingers touched that corroded pot, the torn fabric fluttering in Laura's hand. Were they fragments of survival or remnants of loss? Sleep eluded him. Tomorrow, the canyon would demand more answers. The third day inside Glacier Canyon pressed on Michael with a heaviness that went beyond physical strain. His legs ached from the relentless climbs, his shoulders burned under the pack, and his hands were raw from gripping sharp stone. Yet it wasn't just the terrain wearing him down, it was the silence, the endless stretch of wilderness that seemed to swallow every sound except their own. At times that silence was broken by faint echoes, a rock tumbling somewhere unseen, the sudden cry of a bird overhead. Once, as they crossed a narrow pass, Michael swore he heard voices carried faintly on the wind. He stopped in his tracks, heart racing. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Laura turned, brow furrowed. "Hear what?" "Voices," Michael insisted. "It sounded like someone calling." Sam gave a short laugh, though it lacked humor. "That's the canyon messing with you. Wind bounces around these walls like a bad joke. Don't start chasing ghosts, Turner, or you'll end up joining them." Michael forced himself to nod, but the sound lingered in his head. Was it the wind, or his own desperation twisting the silence into something else? The psychological strain only grew heavier as fatigue dug deeper into them. That night, as the fire crackled weakly and shadows stretched high on the canyon walls, the three sat in uneasy silence. Michael stared at the flames, remembering his brother Mark. He had been younger, reckless, convinced the mountains were a proving ground. The night Mark died, Michael had been the one waiting for him at home, pacing the floor as hours slipped away. The call came at dawn, a fall, a rescue too late. That hollow ache had never left him. Now, sitting in the canyon where David and Ethan had vanished, the memory resurfaced with brutal clarity. He could almost see his brother's face in the firelight, could almost hear him laughing as he packed his climbing gear. Laura noticed his faraway look. "You okay?" she asked softly. Michael blinked, forcing himself back into the present. "Yeah, just thinking about how easy it is to get lost, not just in here but in your own head." Sam snorted, tossing another branch onto the fire. "Thinking too much gets you killed out here. Focus on what's in front of you, that's how you survive." Laura shook her head. "Survival isn't just physical. The canyon breaks people mentally before it breaks them physically. You don't ignore that." Their words hung in the air, two philosophies clashing again. Michael felt trapped between them, Sam's unyielding toughness and Laura's measured caution. Both were right in their own way, but neither eased the gnawing unease inside him. The next morning, the strain turned into friction. As they struggled up a steep incline, Sam pushed ahead, moving fast and aggressive. Michael lagged, his legs trembling, his breath ragged. "Keep up, Turner," Sam barked, not even glancing back. "Not everyone moves like a machine," Laura snapped, pulling Michael up by the wrist. "You'll burn him out if you keep this pace." Sam halted, turning sharply. "And if we slow down, we waste daylight." "Which one kills us first?" Michael staggered between them, chest heaving. "Stop, please, this isn't helping." The canyon loomed around them, silent witness to their conflict. Michael felt the weight of their mission pressing harder with each step. He had come searching for answers, but the deeper they pushed, the more fragile his resolve felt. Doubts whispered like the wind. What if the drone footage had been meaningless? What if all they found were scraps like the rusted pot and torn fabric? Yet even as the doubts pressed in, so did a stubborn determination. The canyon wanted to break them. He could feel it in the endless climbs, the shifting stones, the echoes that twisted into voices. But he wouldn't let it. He couldn't. As night fell again, and they huddled close to the fire, Michael whispered into the dark, more to himself than to anyone else. "We're not leaving empty-handed. We can't." The canyon gave no reply, only the distant groan of rock settling in the night. The fourth day began with a grey sky, low clouds dragging across the ridges like a curtain drawn tight. The air carried the sharp scent of damp earth, and every step sank slightly into mud left behind by a midnight drizzle. Michael felt the weight of exhaustion pressing deeper into his bones, yet something inside him burned brighter than before. He couldn't explain why, but a sense of anticipation tugged at him with every mile. Laura led the way, eyes scanning the trees with the precision of a hawk. Sam trailed close behind, his broad frame steady despite the rough terrain. Michael moved between them, caught in his own thoughts. Then, without warning, Laura raised her hand and stopped. "Look," she said quietly. On the side of a weathered pine tree, the bark bore deep scratches. At first glance they seemed random, but as Michael stepped closer, his breath caught. The marks formed crude letters. E.C. His pulse thundered in his ears. "Ethan Collins," he whispered. Sam crouched down, running his hand along the grooves. The cuts were jagged, uneven, as though made with a small blade or even a sharp stone. Time had worn them, but not erased them. Laura's brow furrowed. It could be a coincidence. Initials like that aren't uncommon. Michael shook his head fiercely. No, not here, not in the middle of this canyon. Ethan was 16. He would have left a sign if he thought help might come. This is him. The air seemed to thicken around them, silence broken only by the rustle of wind through branches. Michael traced the letters with trembling fingers, imagining Ethan carving them with desperate determination, hoping someone would one day find them. Sam stood, his expression unreadable. If this is real, then he was alive out here, at least for a while. The thought hit Michael like a blow to the chest. Ethan hadn't vanished instantly. He had fought, endured, left his mark on the wilderness that tried to erase him. That small carving transformed the canyon from a grave into a witness. But doubt lingered in Laura's tone. It could still mean nothing. We can't let hope blind us. Michael turned sharply toward her, eyes burning. Hope is all Sarah has had for 6 years. Don't take that from her. Laura held his gaze, then softened slightly. I'm not taking it. I'm just reminding you that evidence must be weighed carefully. We follow the signs, but we don't let them dictate the truth until we know more. The team pressed forward, their steps heavier with the burden of possibility. Every tree, every rock seemed to hold potential meaning now. Michael's mind swirled with questions. How long had Ethan survived? Had David been with him when those initials were carved? Was this carving a signal of life or a farewell? As the afternoon deepened, they came across a small clearing where the ground showed faint depressions, irregular and hard to read. Sam crouched, brushing away debris. Could have been a campsite, but it's old. Hard to say how old. Michael's imagination filled the space with images of David and Ethan huddled by a makeshift fire, the father reassuring his son that rescue would come. The thought both lifted and crushed him. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the canvas of his tent while the canyon shifted and groaned around them. The letters burned in his mind. E.C. He whispered them into the dark, as if speaking Ethan's name aloud might bridge the years and bring him closer to understanding what had truly happened here. One truth settled deep into his chest. They were closer than ever before, and the canyon, unwilling as it was, had finally given them a voice from the past. The following day unfolded under a sky the color of slate, clouds heavy and low, pressing on the canyon like a weight. Every step seemed slower, as if the earth itself resisted their progress. Michael trudged forward, his body aching, yet his mind sharpened by the memory of those carved initials. Somewhere in this endless maze Ethan had once stood. That thought alone drove him onward. By late afternoon, Laura suddenly stopped, her hand lifted in a silent command. There, she said, pointing toward a cluster of boulders partly hidden by a ridge. From their vantage point, the rocks appeared unnatural, arranged almost deliberately, as if someone had tried to build against the canyon's unforgiving walls. They approached cautiously. Up close, the signs were undeniable. Branches lashed together with frayed nylon cord, stones stacked into a crude barrier, scraps of fabric caught in the edges, the remnants of a shelter. Michael's breath caught. He crouched, fingers trembling as he touched the weather-worn sticks. They were here, he whispered. Sam scanned the area, his expression grim. It's collapsed. Could have been years ago. But someone lived here at least for a while. Laura knelt beside a corner where leaves had gathered. She carefully shifted the debris, revealing fragments beneath, cloth shredded by time, a cracked plastic container, and bones, small and fragile. Not human, but animal. Rabbit, Laura said, turning the fragment in her hand. Maybe squirrel. They were hunting or trapping for food. Michael's chest tightened. He imagined David showing his son how to survive, how to scrape by with what little the canyon offered. That image of a father fighting against impossible odds to keep his boy alive seared into his heart. Among the debris, Sam uncovered something heavier, a notebook, its cover warped by moisture, pages curled and stuck together. He handed it carefully to Michael. Michael opened it with painstaking care. The ink had bled in many places, words smudged into unreadable streaks, yet some entries remained intact. He squinted, reading aloud in a voice that shook with emotion. Day 5. Cold worse at night. Dad says we can make it if we stay calm. Miss Mom, I just want to go home. He swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Ethan's voice, captured on those fragile pages, was suddenly alive again. Laura placed a steady hand on Michael's shoulder. Easy. Don't rush. Read what you can. He turned another page. The handwriting grew shakier, as if carved by trembling hands. Dad built shelter. Found food. Keep saying we'll see helicopters. I keep listening. Michael's throat closed. He shut the notebook gently, afraid to damage it further. For the first time since stepping into the canyon, he felt they weren't just chasing shadows. They were walking in the Collins' footsteps. Sam exhaled slowly, his usual toughness softened by the weight of the discovery. This isn't just scraps, this is proof. They fought to survive. The shelter, the bones, the notebook, it all spoke of resilience, of a struggle carved into the very canyon walls. Michael sat in silence, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they had found. He imagined Ethan's small hands scribbling those words, David's tired but determined figure guarding their fragile camp. Night fell around them, the fire casting flickering light against the remnants of the shelter. None of them spoke for a long while. The canyon's silence no longer felt empty. It was full of echoes, of lives that had fought and endured. Finally, Michael broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. We can't stop here. If Ethan carved his initials, if he wrote these words, there's more. There has to be. Laura met his eyes, steady but weary. Then we follow the trail wherever it leads. Michael nodded, clutching the notebook to his chest as though it were a lifeline. For the first time in 6 years, the Collins story was speaking again. The notebook lay on Michael's lap, its warped cover glistening faintly in the firelight. He handled it as though it might crumble in his hands. The discovery of Ethan's words had shaken him more deeply than anything else so far. Those pages weren't just evidence, they were a voice, reaching across 6 years of silence. The next morning, Laura suggested they examine it more carefully in daylight. The group sat together on a flat boulder, the canyon's morning chill biting at their skin. Michael opened the fragile notebook, carefully peeling apart the damp pages. Most of the entries were smudged beyond recognition. Rain had washed away entire paragraphs, and in places the ink bled into a blur of black stains. Still, a handful of words pierced through the decay. Day 11. Dad weak. Keep saying stay strong. Keep moving. Michael's voice cracked as he read. It's his handwriting. You can feel the desperation in every line. Laura leaned closer, her eyes scanning what remained. These notes confirm they survived at least 11 days. That's extraordinary in this environment. Sam frowned, running his hand over his beard. Extraordinary, sure, but the last pages, they're ruined. We don't know how it ended. Michael turned carefully to the final sheets. His stomach twisted. The pages were warped and blotched, words barely visible beneath water stains. Only fragments could be read. Too cold. Dad says, "Don't give up." After that, nothing. The last entry was a ghost of ink, impossible to decipher. The silence among them was heavy, broken only by the wind slipping through the canyon's narrow walls. Michael stared at the ruined pages, his chest aching. It's like the canyon itself doesn't want us to know the end, he muttered. Laura placed a steady hand on his arm. Even without the ending, these notes tell us something powerful. David and Ethan endured longer than anyone believed possible. They didn't just vanish, they fought. Sam shook his head. But without knowing where they ended, we're stuck. Do we keep pushing deeper? Or take what we have back to Sarah? Michael's hands tightened around the notebook. We can't stop here. Sarah deserves the full truth, not half of it. Laura exhaled slowly, conflict clear in her eyes. Michael, you need to understand something. Every mile we go further into this canyon increases the danger. We're already carrying more risk than we should. Sam's voice was blunt. If we press on, we may not come back. Are you willing to gamble lives for answers that may not even exist? Michael looked at them both, torn between reason and resolve. His mind replayed Sarah's voice, trembling with years of uncertainty. Please, Michael, don't let it end like this. He stood, clutching the notebook to his chest. I didn't come here for half-truths. If Ethan left a mark on a tree and words in a journal, then there's more out there. I can't walk away now. Laura and Sam exchanged glances, the weight of his words settling over them. Neither agreed outright, but neither turned away either. The canyon had already bound them together, each driven by their own reasons: duty, survival, redemption. As the day waned, the air grew colder. Patches of ice clung stubbornly to shaded rocks, remnants of winter that refused to yield. It was as though the canyon itself guarded its secrets beneath a frozen veil. Michael felt it in his bones. The truth was close, but it would not be given freely. That night, as the fire crackled weakly, Michael read the notebook's surviving words one last time before closing it gently. Ethan's voice lingered in the air, fragile but unbroken. Somewhere beyond the firelight, the canyon whispered back in groans of shifting stone and the sigh of the wind. Michael stared into the darkness, his resolve hardening. The truth was buried here, waiting, and tomorrow they would dig deeper, no matter what the canyon demanded in return. By the 5th day in the canyon, fatigue clung to Michael like a second skin. His muscles burned with every step, and sleep offered little relief. Yet it wasn't exhaustion alone that gnawed at him. It was the sense of urgency, the pull of unfinished words in Ethan's notebook. The story wasn't complete, and the canyon seemed determined to keep it that way. That afternoon the sky darkened with an unsettling speed. Winds swept down the ridges, carrying a chill sharper than before. Laura's face grew tense as she scanned the horizon. "Storm's coming," she said. "We need shelter now." Sam grunted, tightening the straps on his pack. "Storm or not, if we stop moving, we waste time. We've come this far." "We push through." Michael looked between them, his pulse quickening. The wind howled louder and fat snowflakes began to tumble from the sky. "Laura's right. We won't last out here without cover." They scrambled into a shallow cave, formed by a rock overhang. The wind roared outside, snow swirling in wild patterns, while inside the cramped shelter they huddled close to the small fire Sam managed to spark. Hours stretched into the long, merciless night. By morning, the storm had only worsened. Snow piled against the cave entrance, sealing them in like a prison. Their supplies dwindled and hunger gnawed at their stomachs. The fire sputtered low, threatening to die. Laura sat with her knees drawn close, voice steady despite the situation. "We wait it out. 2 days, maybe 3. It's safer than gambling our lives in that storm." Sam's eyes blazed. 3 days stuck in here, and we'll run dry on food. That's the gamble. Sitting ducks in a canyon that doesn't forgive waiting. Michael's hands trembled as he fed the fire with the last of the dry branches. He felt the weight of both arguments crushing him. Laura's caution promised safety, but at the cost of time. Sam's push for action promised progress, but at the risk of death. He thought of Sarah Collins, her voice breaking when she begged him not to stop halfway. "Don't let it end like this." The storm raged on, each gust outside sounding like a scream through the canyon walls. Their breath fogged the cramped air, and the smell of smoke and damp clothes filled the cave. Hunger sharpened their tempers. "Face it," Sam growled. "The canyon doesn't care about your promises, Turner. You can either fight or fold." "Which is it?" Laura's voice cut through his. "Pushing blindly into that storm is suicide. You know it. I won't drag us into the canyon's graveyard because you can't sit still." Michael clenched his fists, caught between their fire and ice. His mind swirled with images of Ethan carving his initials, David building a shelter, the blurred final words in the notebook. They hadn't given up. How could he? Finally he spoke, his voice rough but firm. "We wait, just long enough for the storm to break. Then we move. Not sooner, not later. Sam glared, but said nothing. Laura gave a small nod, though the tension in her shoulders remained. For 2 endless days, they endured the storm. Hunger pressed harder, their rations reduced to crumbs and sips of water. The fire flickered weakly, barely holding back the cold that crept into their bones. At times, Michael thought he heard voices again, the echo of Ethan's words, the steady reassurance of David telling his son to hold on. When at last the winds calmed and light pierced the snow-laden clouds, they emerged from the cave. The canyon lay transformed, white drifts sculpted into harsh shapes, silence deeper than before. Michael looked at the frozen landscape, his chest tight but steady. They had survived the storm, but survival was not the same as victory. Now, they faced the canyon's next test, and the answers still waiting beyond the snow. The storm had passed, leaving Glacier Canyon cloaked in a silence so heavy it seemed to echo. Snow lay deep across the ridges, sparkling beneath a pale sun. The air was bitterly cold, yet clear, every breath sharp as glass. Michael trudged forward with Laura and Sam, each step crunching through the frozen crust. Though exhaustion dragged at his limbs, a strange energy filled him. Something told him the canyon was nearly ready to surrender its secret. They climbed toward a ridge Laura had marked earlier, the same location Daniel's drone had captured the mysterious glint of light. The ascent was brutal. Ice coated the rocks, forcing them to dig in with every foothold. Michael slipped twice, catching himself with trembling hands. Sam hauled him up once, muttering, "Don't quit now, we're too close." At last they reached the ridge. The view stretched wide, a panorama of jagged cliffs and valleys glazed with snow. For a moment, Michael feared they would find nothing. Then Laura stopped, pointing to a cluster of rocks nestled beneath an overhang. "There," she whispered. They approached slowly. Wedged in the shelter of the stones was a bundle of tattered fabric, half buried in ice. Michael's breath hitched. Kneeling, he brushed away the frost. A jacket emerged, faded but intact enough to reveal patches of stitching. He recognized the pattern instantly, the same jacket David Collins had worn in the last photo before entering the canyon. His throat closed. "It's his," he said hoarsely. Sam crouched beside him, shifting the rocks carefully. Beneath the jacket lay a shape that made Michael's heart stop. Bones, shielded beneath layers of cloth and stone. The remains had been positioned with care, as though someone had tried to protect them from the elements. Michael's vision blurred. David Collins hadn't simply collapsed. He had placed himself here deliberately, sheltered against the canyon's wrath. His final act had been one of endurance and love. Laura's voice was low, reverent. He was trying to shield someone. Maybe Ethan. Michael pressed his hands against the frozen ground, overwhelmed by the weight of it. For 6 years, Sarah Collins had lived with unanswered questions. Here at last was an answer, painful but undeniable. Sam uncovered a small tin box tucked within the folds of the jacket. Inside lay a few fragile items, a rusted pocket knife, a photograph of Sarah and Ethan, edges curled with age, and a folded scrap of paper, barely legible. Michael held it carefully, deciphering the faded words. "For Ethan, keep going." The canyon blurred around him, his chest heaving with grief. He could picture David in those final days, weak, exhausted, but still fighting, still trying to ensure his son had a chance. Laura's eyes glistened as she whispered, "He gave everything he had." For Michael, the discovery struck deeper than journalism or survival. It touched the hollow place left by his brother's death, filling it with both sorrow and a strange peace. He thought of Mark, reckless and young, and how he himself had never found closure. But David's sacrifice gave meaning to the Collins' story. It wasn't just tragedy, it was testament. They worked silently, documenting what they could, marking the location with precision. Each item they uncovered seemed to speak louder than words. The jacket, the photograph, the message scrawled in fading ink. Together, they told the story of a father's final stand. As the sun dipped low, casting the ridge in orange light, Michael sat back, clutching the photograph in his gloved hand. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. We'll bring this home. Sarah will know. She'll finally know. The canyon stood silent, its secrets no longer wholly hidden. For the first time in years, the Collins family's story had an ending, even if not the one anyone had hoped for. Yet a question lingered, sharp as the icy wind. If David was here, what had become of Ethan? The descent back from the ridge was quieter than Michael had imagined. The canyon, which for days had felt like a relentless adversary, now seemed subdued, almost reverent. Snow crunched beneath their boots, but none of them spoke much. Each step away from the ridge carried the weight of what they had found and the questions that still lingered. When they finally emerged from Glacier Canyon, the world beyond felt strange. The open sky stretched wide, the air warmer, the landscape less menacing. Yet Michael carried the canyon within him. In his pack lay the notebook, the photograph, and the fragment of David Collins's final message. Proof not of disappearance, but of endurance. Days later, Michael sat across from Sarah Collins in her modest Wyoming home. The light through the window touched her face, etched with years of grief and waiting. He placed the items gently on the table between them. Her hand trembled as she picked up the photograph. Tears welled in her eyes, her voice breaking. This was in his jacket. Michael nodded, his throat tight. He carried it with him until the end. He was fighting for Ethan, for you. Sarah pressed the photo to her chest, sobbing softly. For years, she had lived with the torment of uncertainty. Now, though her heart broke all over again, there was a thread of peace woven into her grief. And Ethan? She asked at last, her eyes searching Michael's face. Michael hesitated. We didn't find him. Not yet. But there were signs. Initials carved, his words in the journal. He survived with his father for days, maybe longer. The canyon tells us he fought too. Sarah closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. That's enough. Knowing they didn't just vanish. Knowing they were together. Her words faded, carried away by quiet sobs. Michael left her house that evening with a heavy heart, but also with the sense that the journey had been worth every hardship. Closure wasn't complete, but it was closer than it had ever been. Back in his apartment, Michael began to write. His article was not just a report, it was a story of resilience, sacrifice, and the human will to endure. He described David's final stand, Ethan's carved initials, the silence of the canyon that had held their struggle for 6 long years. He wrote of how wilderness both tests and teaches, how it strips life down to its rawest truths. When the piece was published, it resonated far beyond Wyoming. Letters poured in from readers across the country, some who had lost loved ones to the wild, others who simply recognized in David's sacrifice the universal bond of family. For many, the Collins story became more than a mystery solved. It became a testament to love carved against impossible odds. One night, as Michael walked through the quiet streets of Jackson, he paused beneath the vast Wyoming sky. Stars glittered cold and sharp, yet comforting. He thought of Ethan, still unfound, his fate a question mark that lingered in the dark. Perhaps one day someone else would uncover the rest of the story, but for now the Collins voices had been heard, their struggle remembered. Michael whispered into the night, as if to both David and Ethan, "You weren't forgotten, you won't be." The canyon had taken much, but it had also given something back, truth, however painful, and the reminder that even in loss, love leaves traces strong enough to endure time and silence. Before we close this chapter, if you've been moved by this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us of resilience, of sacrifice, and of mysteries that shape who we are. And if you want to keep exploring powerful true stories of survival and endurance, click the video now appearing on your screen. The journey continues.